Jody Loomis was a young woman with a deep passion for animals, particularly horses. Her caring nature and desire to help others guided her to pursue a career in nursing. She was fortunate to have a supportive family, a loving fiancé, and a bright future ahead of her. In 1972, after graduating high school, Jody enrolled in college to pursue a degree in nursing. This decision did not surprise those who knew her, as Jody had always wanted to help others. She was determined to positively impact people's lives through her career, and her decision to study nursing reflected her compassionate nature. At this time in her life, Jody was engaged to a man named Jim. Jody and Jim were driven to make a positive impact in the community, and they planned to work together in the same hospital after completing their education. On August 23, 1972, 20-year-old Jody planned to ride her bicycle to the stable where she kept her horse. The stables were only 6 miles away, a relatively short distance. However, this would be the first time Jody would take her bike to the area since her mother, Rosemary, typically drove her. Before Jody left home, Rosemary reminded her to take a dime with her in case she was running late and needed to use a payphone to call home and let them know. Tragedy struck before she ever had the chance to make that call. Jody Loomis was born on June 5, 1952, to John and Rosemary, and was raised in Snohomish County, Washington, a mountainous area about 20 miles north of Seattle. She had 2 siblings, Jana and John Paul. Jana admired her big sister and wanted to be just like her. Growing up in Snohomish County, Jody developed a passion for horses. Jody's love for animals led her to acquire her own horse, which she named Saudi. She kept Saudi at a pasture near her home, where she would often spend her free time riding and training him. Jody was an opinionated young woman who was not afraid to share her thoughts. She had a strong sense of justice and voiced her concerns when she felt something was wrong. Her ability to speak her mind set her apart, and many people admired and respected her for this. On that fateful day in August, a young couple, Walter and Kathy, driving through an access road about 300 yards off the highway into the woods, found their path blocked by a large log. Walter and Kathy got out of the car to move the log out of their way, but as they did, they saw the body of a young woman lying on the ground nearby. This woman was partially dressed, only wearing her underpants and boots. Although this woman was alive, she was in bad shape. She was struggling to breathe and was covered in blood. It had only been 90 minutes since Jody had left her house. Knowing they didn't have enough time to leave the woods and call the police, Walter and Kathy decided to act fast. They quickly lifted the woman and placed her in the back seat of the vehicle. Walter rushed to drive to the hospital, about 15 minutes away. While Walter focused on navigating the road, Kathy remained in the back, holding the woman's head elevated to keep her airways open. However, the young woman's condition continued to deteriorate. Once at the hospital, doctors rushed the bleeding woman into the emergency room, but doctors pronounced her dead soon after arrival. Meanwhile, at the Loomis home, Jody's parents noticed she was late. Since it was the first time Jody rode her bike to the stables, her parents figured it may have taken her a little longer than usual. However, as the night progressed and Jody still had not returned, the Loomis family became increasingly worried. John Loomis called the police and reported to them that his 20-year-old daughter Jody was missing. As the officer listened to John Loomis's description of his daughter, he couldn't help but notice that it matched the description of Jane Doe that had been discovered earlier that day on the dirt road. After John Loomis hung up the phone with the police, detectives headed to the Loomis home. When they arrived, they informed Jody's worried parents about the young woman found on the dirt road. The detectives explained that several hours earlier, a couple had stumbled upon a fatally injured young woman. The detectives said this young woman, who died at the hospital, was most likely Jody but needed a relative to make an identification. John Loomis was faced with the task of identifying the body, and upon seeing the body in the morgue, John was certain that it was indeed Jody. As the investigation into Jody's death began, the detectives asked Walter and Kathy, the couple who found her body, to take them back to the area where they discovered her. The area where Jody was found was the halfway point between her home and the horse stables. Detectives began their investigation by canvassing the area. The detectives interviewed witnesses, examined evidence, and collected any information that might help them piece together the puzzle of Jody's murder. While canvassing the area, detectives came across a witness, the owner of a local fruit stand. This witness informed the detectives that they had seen Jody riding her bike around 5 p.m., which was less than an hour before her body was found. When the medical examiner performed an autopsy on Jody's body, they confirmed that she had been killed by a .22 caliber gunshot wound to the right side of her temple. However, despite an extensive search at the crime scene, investigators were unable to find the gun used to kill Jody. Nevertheless, the medical examiner did recover the bullet from Jody's skull and preserved it for use as evidence. In addition to confirming the gunshot wound, the medical examiner also noticed evidence that Jody had been sexually assaulted and determined there was male DNA present on her body, which was collected. Despite not being able to locate the murder weapon at the crime scene, the investigators managed to secure Jody's white 10-speed bicycle and a pant clip, which Jody had used to prevent her pants from getting caught in her bike chain. Detectives formulated a theory that Jody was riding her bike when she encountered her attacker. The area where Jody was murdered was secluded and covered with thick foliage, which led the detectives to believe that her assailant specifically chose this spot due to its isolated nature. To try and solve Jody's murder, the detectives conducted thorough interviews with her friends and family members. Jody's loved ones, though, could provide no information about her murder. One detective decided to take Jody's bicycle to the FBI lab in Quantico for a forensic examination. However, the analyst did not find any relevant evidence. Several months went by, and the investigation of Jody's murder continued. In the meantime, a confidential police informant approached detectives working on the case and shared valuable information. The informant stated that 2 members of a local gang had been bragging about murdering a girl who was riding a bike. Upon further investigation, detectives discovered that the 2 gang members in question had been connected to a .22 caliber gun. This weapon was the same type of weapon that had been used to kill Jody. One of the gang members had been arrested for shooting the gun at a passing train, so it was already at the evidence unit. A ballistics expert examined the gang member's gun, and the bullet recovered from Jody's skull but was unable to establish a connection between the bullet and the weapon. Frustrated by the lack of progress, the detectives turned to the gang members for answers. They directly asked them if they had anything to do with Jody's murder. However, the gang members denied involvement, and the detectives had no choice but to move on and investigate other leads. Over the next several years, numerous detectives worked tirelessly to solve Jody's murder. The case eventually landed on the shoulders of Detective Jim Scharf. Detective Scharf firmly believed if any case held the potential to be solved, it was this one, considering the suspect had left his DNA behind. When Detective Scharf reached out to the evidence unit to request the DNA for investigation, he was met with disheartening news. The supervisor informed him that crucial pieces of evidence from Jody's murder investigation were missing. Specifically, the missing items included Jody's white 10-speed bike, the swabs containing the male DNA from her autopsy, and the .22 caliber bullet recovered from her head. Without these essential items, Detective Scharf faced a significant setback in his efforts to unravel the case. However, there was one crucial piece of evidence still in the case file: Jody's clothing that she had been wearing on the day of her murder. Recognizing the value of this potential lead, Detective Scharf promptly sent Jody's clothing to the state crime lab for analysis. He hoped the lab technician could gather evidence that could lead to a suspect. To his delight, the lab technician was successful. They managed to find male DNA on Jody's boot, providing a glimmer of hope in the investigation. Once the detective obtained the complete DNA profile from the male DNA found on Jody's boot, he submitted it to CODIS, a nationwide database for criminal DNA. However, despite the extensive search, no matches were found. Detective Scharf recognized the potential of forensic genetic genealogy as a tool in solving Jody's murder. This innovative technology has proven instrumental in solving several cold case murders that were previously thought to be unsolvable. With this idea in mind, Detective Scharf sought the expertise of genealogist Deb Stone. Utilizing a database such as GEDmatch, Deb Stone conducted an extensive search. The database allowed her to compare the DNA profile obtained from Jody's boot to an extensive database, uncovering a list of distant relatives. Armed with this list, Deb Stone set her sights on the Miller family. By carefully analyzing the genealogy and genetic connections, she was able to confirm that someone from that bloodline was the most likely suspect. Detective Scharf thoroughly investigated the Miller family, focusing on 6 brothers in the Snohomish County area. However, one brother stood out among the rest: Terrence Miller. While all 6 brothers lived in Snohomish County, where Jody was murdered, Terrence's background was unique. Terrence was a sex offender. He would have been 30 years old at the time of Jody's murder. He was now 77. Investigators searched for any link between Terrence and Jody, but their efforts yielded no evidence of any connection between them. There was no reason for the two of them to have been together on the day Jody was murdered. However, detectives did learn that Terrence was working at a construction site at the time of Jody's murder, near where her body had been discovered. Undercover officers had been following Terrence Miller with the ultimate goal of obtaining some form of DNA sample from him. Detective Scharf realized that Terrence was increasingly worried that the police were closing in on him. One evening, while conducting surveillance, one of the officers noticed a newspaper article on Terrence's garage table. The article highlighted the recent solving of a murder through genetic genealogy. Detectives thought Terrence was getting scared the police were going to use this technique to solve Jody's murder. One day, while at a casino, Terrence disposed of a coffee cup. Without hesitation, one of the officers retrieved the discarded cup from the trash. The officer took the cup and meticulously preserved it, ensuring that any potential DNA evidence would be preserved intact. This cup was then promptly sent to the crime lab for testing. After 1 week, eagerly awaited results arrived. The male DNA found on the boot belonging to Jody Loomis was a match to Terrence. In April 2019, Terrence Miller was arrested for murdering and sexually assaulting Jody Loomis nearly 40 years earlier. This news shocked Jody's siblings, Jana and John Paul, who had long believed the case would remain unsolved. Tragically, Jody's parents, John and Rosemary, had passed away before Terrence's arrest. After Terrence Miller's arrest, he was questioned by detectives and denied involvement in the murder and sexual assault. He claimed to have never met Jody Loomis. However, the DNA evidence against Terrence was compelling and irrefutable. Terrence Miller was released on bail and allowed to remain home until his trial began. The trial of Terrence Miller for the murder and sexual assault of Jody Loomis began in 2020 and lasted for about 2 weeks. While the jury was out for deliberation, Miller took his own life with a .22 caliber handgun while at home on bond. However, due to the loss of evidence, there was unfortunately no way to prove that the handgun used to take his life was the same one he used to murder Jody. The judge made the choice not to disclose this information to the jury and instead allowed them to continue deliberating. Approximately 1 hour after the news reached the judge, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Terrence Miller guilty. On December 17, 2020, the judge made a significant ruling when Terrence's defense attorneys fought to have his conviction overturned. Even though Terrence took his life before the verdict, the judge upheld the ruling, stating that there was sufficient evidence to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Terrence Miller was Jody's murderer. This decision was formalized when the judge signed a document confirming Terrence Miller's guilt. Jody's loved ones were immensely grateful for the tireless efforts and dedication of the detectives, forensic experts, and others who worked on her case for over 4 decades. Jana, Jody's sister, voiced her gratitude for the outcome, stating how lucky she felt that Jody's case had been solved. She expressed her hope that other families would be able to receive answers through the remarkable tool of forensic genetic genealogy. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think about this case? Can't wait for more? Click the link above to learn about the horrific murder of a family taken at the hands of a child in The Deadly Retreat. Stay curious, stay connected, stay with Reely Unreal.